1 Extra.
Thank you very much, David Rodigan, and thank you so much for tuning into the show. My name is Reece Parkinson.
I'm Bridgitte Tetteh, a journalist and presenter.
And the time is 8:30 p.m. We're usually earlier on a Sunday with hashtag 1 Extra Talks, but tonight we are doing a very special show. We're looking into the life and legacy of Stephen Lawrence.
Now, Stephen was killed in a racially motivated attack in South London 25 years ago. The case was one of the highest profile racial killings in UK history and led to dramatic reforms in the way that police handle racially motivated crime and their attitudes towards racism.
And so on tonight's show, we're going to be taking a look at whether things have really changed in the space of 25 years since his death.
With our conversation, we have a panel of special guests here with us. So first up, let's say hello to Professor Brian Cathcart, who's a journalism lecturer at Kingston University, London, and author of the book, The Case of Stephen Lawrence. Thanks for being with us.
My pleasure.
Also, hi to Janet Hills, who's chair of the Metropolitan Black Police Association.
Good afternoon. Good evening. Yeah.
Also, author Jeffrey Boakye. There you go. Boakye. There we go. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks so much. Good to be here.
Also, we have the very special honour of having Baroness Doreen Lawrence with us as well. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
Good evening, everyone.
Can we make some noise for our panel, please?
You, of course, over the last few weeks have had to live through the events personally, publicly, going along to several different events. And I just was talking to my mum and we were both thinking, how are you coping? How are you?
I should say for the documentary, I did not watch. I saw the beginning of the first clip and I decided I have no intention of watching any of it because I think that's my life really. And for me, I couldn't sit through it because it just brought back all the things that happened back in 1993 and followed for the next 25 years, really.
So what did you decide to do? What have been the highlights of the last few weeks for you?
It was put into, the documentary happened and then leading up to the service. So the service for me, because I've been doing one, I think, every year for the first 10 years and then every 5 years. And coming for 25 years, I just think, it has to stop. I cannot keep on. I've not had an opportunity to, I presume, just sit back and think about life for myself because I've been having to fight justice, fight for Stephen. It's a fight. And I just think 25 years is a long time to fight.
You finally then just saying, I'm tired. At any point did you feel like giving up?
No. As a parent, I think anybody who's a parent will know when you lost somebody and the way in which Stephen was taken, it wasn't an accident. He wasn't ill. Somebody deliberately walked up to him and killed him. And then they just laughed in the face of justice. And am I supposed to just sit back and say, oh, well, that's just one of those things? No, my son was special. He had a future. There was so much stuff that happened for him. And we were just left for how many years not being able to move on. My children have grown up in the shadow of the death of their brother. And we've had to live that.
Does that surprise you that some people in our generation didn't really realise how racist the country actually was back then?
I didn't realise how racist the country was back then either. I think especially for young girls growing up. I mean, so I've always been in the Southeast. I've always grown up in the Southeast. So I didn't realise how bad it was. You hear stories, you read about things, you hear about young people, especially back in the day, kids, especially young boys, be thrown in the back of the police van. You hear all those stories, but not the extent of it, until it hits you. I remember after Stephen died, a young girl went to the same church as Stephen and at the same school. And she came to the house and I said, people are saying that where I live is really racist. And it's because I didn't believe that. And I asked her the question and she just burst out crying and said, yes. I think as parents and as women, we don't realise how much young men understand it more than we do. And at the time, for Stephen to say he was suffering, I remember at school he talked about it. Within his secondary school, I don't remember saying anything much. But then young people don't always tell their parents about what's happening to them on the street. So we're always none the wiser for kids growing up. And it's only at that point then you realise, even my neighbours, which is what's really shocking. You know, I've lived in that area for good, 15 years or so, almost in the same house. My kids grew up with the kids around the area, and I still didn't know that. But when Stephen died, the reality hit me. That's when I realised that my neighbours weren't my neighbours.
Wow. And I want to go to the audience here, because how does it make you feel that, you know, Stephen was murdered purely based on his race?
One thing that I found quite interesting and quite scary to see is, at the time, obviously I wasn't born 1993, 1995, but what the documentary made it seem like is back then, the rise of racism was increasing, right-wing, BNP, and he wanted kind of immigrants out. Fast forward to now, and I feel like we're seeing the same thing. You know, you look at just little stuff like the Brexit vote, you know, based on immigration, so people want people of colour out. And I think that's quite scary to see growing up, because me growing up in the 2000s, when I was obviously more aware of things were, you see racism there and there, you hear it, especially now on social media. It's easier to kind of call people words and say certain stuff. But again, I think what's scary now is we're seeing the rise of, you know, these people with huge followings and backing and support, and, you know, and they want people of colour out of this country for what? Because, do you know what I mean? So again, it goes back to the question, you know, could this happen again? Because that rise, what I saw from 1933, maybe you lot could probably vouch because you lot were alive that time, on how things are from now. Is it similar to how it is now from 1993 to 2018, you know, the rise of that kind of right wing, get people out of this country? Is it similar?
The rise. I think during the time for the BNP, I mean, don't hear too much about them now. There's other groups that's taken their place, and even them, I think, especially now, what's happening to our young kids, you know, the amount of the killing on the streets and all the rest of it. And I hear they say that we don't have to do anything anymore because they're doing it to themselves, which is sad. You know, we did not go through all this for young people to take up arms against themselves or against anyone. So that's very sad. You know, for me, I think when I listen to that, and I'd like to understand what it is. I remember a young person saying back, probably about 10 years ago, when he said he didn't expect to live beyond the age of 25. And for you to have that in your head because somebody stepped on your toe or somebody, you know, knocked your hat off your head or something, that you take up arms against each other. And so rather than us focusing on where the racism is and how do we look to address that, we're having to look at what's happening within the community. And for me, we shouldn't have been that place. One of the things I think what happened there, back in 1999 when the inquiry happened, and I think the amount of young people was killed before Stephen, kids felt that how the community was and the police was not protecting them, right? So they felt that nobody's out there for them, so they need to protect themselves. And I think that's when the knife start carrying, because that's when kids were being killed. But now, rather than just say they're protecting themselves, they're turning the knives on themselves, which is a sad thing. Because before that, it was where the racism and young black men, especially men, were being killed. And so they felt they need to take up arms to protect themselves. And so then the police now, rather than them looking to support these young people and to catch them, for me, a crime is a crime. I don't care who commits the crime. A murder is a murder. I don't care who commits the murder. And for the police, rather than investigating the murder as such, they have decided they're going to have this new group called Trident, black on black crime. So it's been put in this little box. And when the question I ask, how many of those people who's committed the crime has been arrested and sent to prison, nobody can answer me. Right? I spoke to the Home Secretary about this, and when I said to her, if this was a group of white kids who had been murdered on the streets, the government, the society would not put up with it. They would do something about it. And because it's our black kids are being killed, she said to me, they should not. She doesn't believe that and she doesn't accept that. A fact is a fact. So our young people need to wake up, because nobody cares.
I think what I was kind of frightened by is how much things haven't changed in watching the documentary. Perhaps all that has changed is that racism is perhaps not as overt, so it might be a bit more difficult to deal with it in our day-to-day lives. But in terms of how we are being treated, or how black people are treated, and the ways in which crime is treated by the Metropolitan Police, is just it was just a bit overwhelming to see just how racist it was back then, and essentially how it still is.
Naomi, maybe you experienced it yourself, but has anyone in the room actually had like a racist incident at them? Yeah, if we could get, what's your name?
Gemma, 27.
Definitely 27.
Definitely. Yeah, like as everyone was talking, I was thinking about an experience when I was in school, because I lived in a really small town outside of London. Lived in London, then moved out. I had quite a lot of experiences with racism, because there was about 3 black people in the school at the time, and I didn't really come from like a ghetto as such area, quite a posh area when I used to live in London, but moving out there I was still very different to everybody there, and experienced quite a lot. Like I had things thrown at me on the road, I had like people shout stuff. By the time I got there, we had people writing, get the N-word out of here, get the COON word out of here, like we don't want them in our town. Yeah, this is around the town. And then we also had a website that was put up with the 3 black people's pictures put on the website, and said that they took our school pictures, you know, when everyone takes school pictures every year, and put on the website to say that they don't want us in their town anymore. And I think it was like, when I think back to the experience, I just feel like it made me stronger, but it changed the way I thought about certain people. It changed the way I perceived certain people and how I dealt with certain people, because I had never experienced that type of overt racism, like people throwing things out of their car at me, and it was quite bad for a while. But I think it's weird, because when we're talking about like institutions like the Metropolitan Police and stuff, it made me think about the way my school handled it. And what they did was they scapegoated one of the people who made the website, and that person got excluded from school. But all the other people who were involved, who would actively kind of call me names in the hallway and stuff like that, like me and my friend were called Biggie and Tupac because I was tall and she was short, and that's literally what they named us instead of calling us by our actual name. And yeah, it made me kind of think back to the documentary in the way that only 2 people ended up being prosecuted, and it's like they see that as a win, whereas it's like, it's not, because everybody that was involved in that situation should be held accountable. And I feel like that's exactly what happened in my school. One person was.
I just saw Brian Cathcart, who's here with us, freelance journalist and author of a book about Stephen Lawrence, shaking your head to some of that as we were listening to real experiences of encountering racism on the streets. And I wonder if you could just put all of this into context for us in terms of, you know, you were there writing about racially motivated attacks at the time that this was taking place, at the time that we heard about the murder of Stephen Lawrence.
On the business of life on the street, I mean, I remember vividly being at the Macpherson inquiry when they looked into stop and search. And I remember vividly that they were horrified that 5 times as many young black person was 5 times more likely to be stopped and searched than a young white person. And they said to the police, look, we don't want to hear any more of these excuses. Get on and fix this. And that was in the report in 1999. That was 5 times. We're now at 8 times. So it really has not improved.
What the police should be doing,
Yeah.
right? A policeman's supposed to go out and do his job. It doesn't matter what your race or what your colour is.
No, of course not.
That is what they're supposed to do, right? And the mere fact, because I was saying that you have cameras all over the place, so they know who's committing some of these murders. So they're not in isolated cases, because if they want to, they could take those guys off the street. I believe that they could. Because they have because there was one young man, and this is after Stephen died, we used to have like some sort of vigil, and there's this one guy. He was very tall, this young black guy, and I'm sure he was underage, and of course his voice must have been louder than everybody else. Now nobody had a name on them or their addresses on them, but the police was able to go to his house and speak to his parents. How do they do that? Facial recognition and all the rest of it. And back in 93. And so they have much more sophisticated things now than they did back then.
Definitely. Yeah, I agree.
So if they want to solve a crime, and the crime that is committed, they can do. But it suits them in some cases.
Yeah, I understand that.
Right? So as our young men, I'm just beginning to think that my grandson is 7. I've got 3 grandchildren, 2 boys, birth a little bit different. But they're 7. In 3 years' time, they're going to be 10, 11, going to secondary school. Do I have to start worrying about them on the street now? Which is what's going to happen.
Janet, what about that notion that black on black crime is at an all-time high? Is that factually accurate? Is he right to say that, and actually right that the black community is scrutinised in this kind of way?
So the last time we had this spike in sort of knife crime was in 2009. They held a Home Affairs Select Committee around it. So the government got together and there were certain interventions that were put in place. What I will say, at that same time, 2009, stop and search was at the highest it's ever been, but it still didn't impact on what was happening on the streets. So, you know, there is a degree that says actually we need to be reassured as a community that police are there to protect us, but does stop and search do that bit of work? Or should it be part of a package of measures that is done across a number of different agencies so that actually we are dealing with the problems? So to a degree, you know, we've now got this situation which I believe has superseded the 2009 data, where I think there does need to be a sort of cross-party, cross-government, cross-agency approach to dealing with it, similar to what the young man talked about is happening in Scotland, needs to happen here in London in order to reduce this spike in crime at the minute, violent crime at the minute.
Let's go to this lady here, yeah.
Hi, my name's Danielle and I'm 20 years old. With the whole buzzword of like black on black crime, if we do take statistics, because everybody likes them, statistically speaking, you are more likely to kill whoever, nobody's a murderer obviously, but you are more likely to kill whoever you are, grow up around, whoever is in your immediate environment. So if we take Cade's example, for example, he's from Lewisham, that's a fairly multicultural area, there's communities of colour present. So if you're a young person of colour, you are more likely to kill whoever it is around you, right? So if you take the murder of the average white person, for example, it's most likely to be a white person that's committed that murder. So the whole black on black crime, white on white crime thing, it doesn't actually mean anything. You're more likely to kill whoever's around you. That's why the real question is why it is that when a black person commits a crime against another black person, for example, with our knife crime epidemic, why it's not investigated with the same kind of urgency as white on white crime is.
I wonder if there's anyone here who could actually, just on your point there, Janet, would say that they do trust the police and that they would turn to the police if there was a crime happening. Ahmed?
Yeah. I'll say sometimes, obviously, you do trust and don't trust, but before that trust can kind of happen, and it's not going to happen anytime soon unless something from the top happens. Simple as that. You know, how can we trust police? You know, even just starting from the whole Stephen Lawrence case, just from there, you know, it happened from the top, even at the bottom. But the bottom don't know any better because the top don't know any better. Same now. Again, even the question I was asked to young kids, work, young, you know, blaming this, you know, black people basically, you know, work, you know, for the police, you know, be police officers. Like, no. Ask the same question now. You're going to get the same response. And there's no trust, but before the trust comes, change has to occur from the top. Before trust we can even talk about trust, because it ain't gonna happen unless stuff can happen on the top. And I don't think anything from the top is happening. You may have something else to say, but
I agree in so much that as well. You know, stop and search doesn't help, because if people who are 10 are going to be stopped, that's influencing their decisions for the future. You know, that's influencing the fact that they feel that I've done nothing wrong, but yet I'm being stopped. So then that trust, that, you know, confidence in policing is being eroded away. So it's a really fine line that we have to tread. We know it exists. We know that our communities have a lack of confidence and trust in policing. And that is where a lot of the work needs to go in rebuilding that trust. And you're right, it does need to come from the top.
Sorry to cut you off, Jenny. We're going to hear from the audience again, but I just wanted to ask you before we did, do you feel like it would be a change if there was more BME people working in the force?
Again, the example I'll use is around women. in policing and in particular, and in industry. We've had a gender pay gap review where we know that women get paid less. So for me, there needs to be a tipping point. And they say it's like 30% of your employees, once you get to that point, you can then influence what happens around you and those changes. So the answer is yes. For us to really be able to make those changes, you have to do it from within. You can't be doing it from outside.
And you said it was 30%. Do you know the percentage currently?
No, it is around 30%
okay.
marker. So for gender, they're sort of around about 28%.
Okay.
And in policing, we are around 6% nationally, and that's 13% in policing. But then you've got a community which is 40+% of African Caribbean.
I don't want to get confused about her is that, first of all, what Janet is doing and living, if you listen to her testimony, is incredibly brave, because she stepped into an institution and she used the word naive, apolitical, and she's grown within it in a state of complete vulnerability and had to find her people. She's not representing the Metropolitan Police Service. She's part of a kind of subsect within that service. And she's here, sitting here, visibly, head above the parapet, taking your questions and your criticisms directly. We will know that the positive change is taking place when Janet is the commissioner. Because, am I wrong? We all know that positive change is taking place because that means that the institution is recognising the fight and the struggle that you are going through. And it's difficult. It's difficult. We might be here in 25 years and nothing's changed. Baroness, you went through the exact same. You were forced into a state of absolute vulnerability, forced into through no fault of your own. It brings tears to everyone's eyes because you were forced to become so brave, so exposed, and you have had to fight. And there has been some recognition of that. But are the institutions willing to really look at themselves and to take these examples and to promote them and then to force the agenda? Because you have an agenda, and that should be the police's agenda, full stop. Absolutely. You had an agenda for 25 years. That should be this country's agenda, full stop. And that's what I think this point is. This 25 years, if the country starts realising what the real agenda is, then we can start taking those positive steps. And I really do think that it is the bravest thing that both of you women have done in your lives, because it's so exposing, so vulnerable, and just fraught with risk, because you're getting it from every angle. So I want to applaud both of you for fighting. No, seriously, I do.
Given what you've been hearing, is anybody maybe thinking actually that Jeffrey's got a point, Janet's got a point, we need to see more, visibility?
I want to go to the man at the front. Yeah.
Hi, Nee, 23 years of age. Jeffrey, you made a great point, by the way. But yet again, I still feel, why does there still need to be a subsection within the police force? A black minority. Why does that need to be? And this is where I state my question, Janet. How much power do you feel like you've inflicted within the police force now that this subsection has been put into place?
So we'll be celebrating 25 years next year. And, for all of that time, clearly I haven't been involved in that. I've been the chair for 5 years and a member for longer. But for me, there has been a number of ways it's been influenced, not just internally, but externally as well. There are groups now within, say, probation, within prison, that actually realise that they can do a similar thing. They can network in that way and have a voice around changing the same sort of things that we're trying to do in policing. Because David Lammy's report, again showed that the criminal justice system is fraught with racism. The race audit has exposed wider society to racism, that there is racism within all of that. And if people are not making a stand and not having a voice, they're not trying to influence, then seriously, we probably wouldn't be having this conversation now, in truth, because actually we would be silenced, we would be crushed. But it takes people to do that I'm sure within the teaching side of things, there is a part of it that is a black section that gets the fact that actually black boys should not be excluded and that they should be worked with and kept within the mainstream and educated. Do you know what I mean? So it's everywhere. It's not just in policing. And I think it's right that, we've set an example because I guess we've been around the longest. But it's right that we should have. It's unfortunate that we have got the subsections because we should all be integrated, but we're not there yet.
So, Janet, I wanted to go to this text. It's from an anonymous texter, but it says, I'm a black British female that's currently a serving officer within the Essex Police, and I joined to help make a difference and make a change. However, in my 3.5 years of service, I've been subjected to 4 incidents of racism from my own colleagues. Only one has been looked into. Seems to be brushed under the carpet, and it is a disgrace. How, Janet, just on that, how can 3 of the 4 incidents get ignored?
Again, it's the lens in which it's being looked at. If someone within my organisation uses the N-word, for instance, for me, that is a misconduct. Not only is it a misconduct, it's a gross misconduct. Should the person lose their job? Who knows? It's not for me to make that decision. But the fact that we're not even recognising the fact that that should be in that sphere, that, you know, it should be put there, then that is a problem for policing. And it's all about the lens in which those sort of problems are being looked at. And that's why that can happen.
Yeah.
Because someone will look at that and think, well, that's not racism, because they're not applying a lived experience to what the allegation is.
I can see more hands going up, so I just want to get to Ahmed in the front there.
One thing that you said that we have to kind of jump into the system to change, but I think it's one thing jump into the system, but are we actually going to be at the top to make the change? And it comes back to the training, because obviously sometimes I feel sorry for police officers because they're human beings at the end of the day, so they're not born racist. So sometimes we see police and we label it racist, whatever, all that kind of stuff. So they're human beings at the end of the day. So obviously they go into training, and there's something happening there must be something in training that's happening, you know, for them to be acting like this, because they're not born racist. And also, I just feel like the people at the top just don't care. If you look at the prison system, it just shows you like there's no care from the prison system to outside. So there's only so much we can kind of do. You know, you're probably 1 in a million who can, you know, create that kind of change. So but for the rest of us, there's only so much we can do because we're not at the top. And how can we get to the top? How?
Can I just, I want to bring Brian in here because I saw some nodding going on, and I wondered for you, someone who stepped outside of this, you know, documented the case of Stephen Lawrence, what would you say are the things to change the way policing is happening and to bridge those race gaps? What would you say are, you know, is it more diversity in the police? What do you think?
Well, I think I'm struck, I think you said earlier on that we need more from the top. One of the striking things at the end of the inquiry into the Stephen Lawrence case was that the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary stood up and said, look, institutional racism in this country is a problem. And I don't think that was more than skin deep, frankly. And I think that we never heard that kind of language from a Prime Minister or a Home Secretary again. And I wonder whether actually people in the room think that more leadership from, you know, leading politicians on issues of race would make a difference, whether that's where the gap is.
What's changed for you?
I presume, well, people like me can speak to Prime Ministers now. And but the thing with it, I think what we all need to understand is that they're no different to us, right? And so we can challenge, we can ask questions. We don't have to be rude and aggressive, and I think that's what they think that we are. But just ask questions and be at the table. I think many times when I was sitting in the Home Office, what I did not see is enough of black officers at the table. You need to be there in order to make that difference. We need to be there. And so all of you young people, get into whatever it is, studies that you're doing, so you can be in a position to ask the question. There's no point just sitting on the outside and saying, oh, this is not really good for me. You need to be there. You know, you need to be able to challenge what's happening around you and what's happening to you as a person. That's what I try to do. I was not rude, I was not aggressive, but I would not take no for an answer. You know, something's happened, I need to know the truth. And the truth always come out. So all I can say to you young people is that you need yourself to think about what it is you want and you go for it. Don't let anybody tell you you're not good enough or this is not happening to you. You need to go for it. You need to be at the table. And that's where you can make the difference, not outside on the street.